Okay, it is Monday night. Hello, everyone. We're live talking to you about our JEDI events, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We're continuing our conversation about caste, the foundations of caste. This week, we're tackling pillars 5 through 8. There are 8 pillars total in this conversation that Isabel Wilkerson has researched and put together. It's a lot. Last week, we couldn't finish the conversation, what we had discussed and the topics that we wanted to pull out. And this week will be the same. And I actually think some of the things are a little more difficult and a little deeper and more disturbing. But I wanted to share a couple of things before we bring on the guests. Just a reminder that today is Indigenous Peoples Day. I forgot and I kept checking the mail and the post office is closed today. So Indigenous Peoples Day, if you don't know about it, if you are confused about the whole Christopher Columbus thing, please do some research, watch some videos, read some books. There's plenty of stuff on social media right now. People are talking about it. There are plenty of memes. Graphic design artists have put things together. The information is out there. So learn more about that. And I wanted to make a recommendation real quick to watch Reservation Dogs on Netflix. Actually, it's not on Netflix. Let me fix that. It is not on Netflix. It's on Hulu. I'll fix it real quick. Sorry. Hulu. It's great story about life on reservation, and it follows a group of kids around some tragedies. Our power might go out, so if we drop off the air, I just had a flash, then I guess we'll see you next time. Okay, so let's bring Richard on. Thank you, Richard, for joining the conversation. We have a lot to talk about today. Anything interesting happen?
Hi.
At work?
Today, it's super windy here in the valley. Like that's why. That's why I think.
Yeah, you're cutting
out. And our network is cutting out too. So sorry, everybody, but we'll find out this before.
Yeah, we just had a weird surge. It seemed like the power's going to go out. Hopefully it'll last an hour. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about the foundations of caste, pillars 5 through 8. And this week, London McBride is going to be joining us, right? Oh, hello. Surprise, you're on.
What's up? What's up, Richard?
Not much. How you doing?
Man, chilling. How are you?
Good to see you, London. There's so much. I always say there's so much. I really feel like last week we didn't do the conversation justice because we had to skip. We still went over the time a little bit last week, and we still couldn't cover everything. It was a great conversation. And this week, there's a lot to cover. There's a lot of historical things that we're going to pull out, some facts that are disturbing. They kind of test, how you feel about being an American, or at least it does for me personally. It does make me want to learn more and be more engaged and involved in these conversations. So that's why we keep doing this. So I'll just pull up the first pillar so we can start talking about this. Occupational hierarchy. And this has a lot to do with, I feel like we always talk about this, just like in terms of economics and the way that the workforce is built. How some jobs just seem to be reserved for some people, and even people of color who become educated find it very difficult to work their way up or be taken seriously or whatever. So this section says a lot about the way that this was built. And again, these are things that I feel like a lot of people who are wanting to have these conversations will point out. They want to talk about this. They'll bring it up, but then it's quickly dismissed as the singular person who is making it a big deal or bringing attention to something that doesn't matter or isn't important. But the beginning of this section takes us back to South Carolina in the late 1700s, I think it was. I didn't put the date down. So let's talk about this guy for a little bit. Senator James Henry Hammond of South Carolina, who it turns out was a slave owner, had several plantations, was a pedophile and a rapist. They're not bad words. They're just describing who this person is. So I feel like when people like use the word racist or whatever, that, you know, there's like this defensiveness. I think that these are strong things to say about this person, but the description is this. This is who he was before he became a senator, and people knew and they still voted for him. So I'm bringing him to the attention of everyone because of the way that how he helped create this pillar, okay? This idea that there's this mud sill, and if you're in construction, maybe you know about this more than I do, but this idea that there's like building blocks and the way that they're laid out, the strongest ones are considered part of the mud sill, right? If I was reading that correctly. And then everything's built on top of that. So this occupational hierarchy kind of came to be because of this person and the way he talked about the economics of slavery in the government at the time. So I'm going to pull up a description and then we can jump into the conversation. The economic purpose of the hierarchy is to ensure the tasks necessary for a society to function get handled whether or not people wish to do them by being born to the disfavored caste. And he was sort of a proponent of this. Do you guys have thoughts?
Is he the one that said, no, I might get it wrong, but he said that this is a condition that God created, and that
Yes.
blacks
Yes.
are in this position because God created it, and we've elevated them out of their horrendous,
They are elevated. It's at the very first page of the Pillar 5 and 131 in the book. They're elevated from the condition in which God first created them by being made our slaves. And then from there, this economic hierarchy was built, basically, because of him. He's the father of this, I guess you could say.
But people accepted enough of what he had to say by voting him into the Senate over and over.
I mean, even without being voted in, he's a prominent figure. He owns property and he owns enslaved people and he's got money. He's one of those people.
And they felt justified doing it. Justified doing it because, I mean, all that stuff, and Richard hit on it, the fact that God made us this way. So they're still taking scripture and tweaking it how they want it and saying that, hey, you remember Noah's son? Hey, it's because of you and the curse that's on the land. And now you black people, hey, you guys got to be slaves because that's what the Bible said. And folks are just eating it up because you're dealing with those two issues. Folks back there, the white people back then, they didn't want to be the lower class, but they always wanted to please God. So you have those two issues that's going on, those two, conflicts that they're dealing with internally, and they just justified it. They totally justified it. And for someone to be able to get away with all the stuff that he got away with and still being this prominent figure in society and then end up being a senator, it's because really when it came down to it, he wasn't black.
Right. Right. So just a quick reminder, South Carolina,
Yeah.
James Henry Hammond, senator, South Carolina, slave owner, pedophile, rapist. Okay. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but this idea that in America, we feel like we're very far removed from these kinds of things and putting these kinds of people in power. And sure, this was, 18th century. However, this could very well be 50 years ago. It could very well be today because, victim blaming, not believing people of color, not believing women, all of those things could still be in play. So that's the unfortunate part of it. The disgusting part of it is because then, like I said, like this idea that hierarchy of the way that our economic system is built came from a person like this, and that, like you guys are saying, he was still a prominent figure during that time and was able to help make decisions that created the system and then put it in place and kept it going. Okay, so after the Civil War, again, South Carolina, I mean, you guys are batting 1,000. After the Civil War, the legislature in South Carolina prohibited Black people from performing any labor other than farm or domestic work. So we're talking about occupational hierarchy, okay? It's not just about the social contract, and that's why I like the way she built out these pillars, because we have these conversations and they're always built around race. It's always about these race issues in the workforce. But then when you really start breaking them down and saying, okay, but this is why, because right after the Civil War, stuff like this was happening. These things were codified into law to prohibit Black people from changing their station. We have a comment, hang on a second.
Yeah, I thought she had mentioned too in there that sort of hit home with the idea around it, and was that for these two occupations, farm work and domestic work, what was it, 90% of African American men and women that's the only jobs they held. That was it. Mm-hmm. And to restrict, and that's how the caste was just built. You're going to restrict it, and all the atrocities that happened were to maintain that hierarchy, and it's disgusting.
Yeah.
Also, it's like being excluded and then being punished for being excluded, right? So this, again, like this historic association between menial labor and Blackness served to further entrap Black people in a circle of subservience in the American mind. So it's like, well, are they doing that work because that's the only kind of work they can do? But that's the only kind of work that they're allowed to do. So they're not capable of doing any other kind of work. And so then it's just like this constant, that circle keeps this economic structure going. And then those people, right, the Black people, are then punished if they step out, if they look like they're going to step out, right? So this, and I like it because of the word subservient. So caste was not merely doing a certain kind of labor, it meant performing a dominant or subservient role. So this is where there's a little more detail to what this idea of a hierarchy built into the labor force was about.
Yeah. It kind of kept you, like you said before, it kind of kept you locked in to that type of work. Like you never thought that you could escape it or become better than, because this is what you've been fed all this time. I mean, I'll be honest with you, like even you were talking about, how things are done even today. I mean, perfect example is, why is it that, a lot of African Americans, families push their kids in the athletics or music and stuff like that when they can do way more. But it's because those are the things, and I really believe those are the things that they've allowed us to do and excel at, to kind of just throw that carrot out there and say, well, we'll give you this. But it's still it's almost like, and I love how my wife says it, like, you can be the football player, but you just can't be the owner. So, it's like that. It's those roles that they try to trap us in to make us feel like we can't do more. So then it becomes a psychological issue that we're battling with, not just a skill issue, because we know we have the skill, but then it's like, you get in trouble for reading, and families will get, punished or separated or beaten or killed because they're teaching their kids how to read. So that's a psychological effect on people to say, well, you know what? I don't want to do this. If this means that this is going to rip my family to pieces, then we're going to stay in this subservient role. This is just our lot. This is where we fall, and it's sad because it plays those mental games on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit in the next section when we talk about dehumanization and how that ends up working across all parts of caste, with including the people that are being dehumanized. Because within each caste, then there's like a hierarchy, right? So with this, in like labor or in workforce, there's this idea that within each organization or within each industry, there are also these divisions of labor, which, we're not saying everything has to be flat across the board, because some people need to be more skilled than others. It's the idea that because caste is the ruling way of doing business in America and the way our society is built, that then those certain people need to also take up that rung of caste within an organization. So, like talking about, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people about school districts and the way they're built, corporations and the way that they're built. And then to the extent that when someone posts a meme about how you treat the janitor the same way you treat the CEO, that's like, oh my God, wow. Like, what an idea to treat them like a human being. You're doing so much because you're treating the janitor the way that you would treat the CEO. It's like, we're celebrating that because we've been told that people who work in those jobs don't matter as much, right? And we're not going to get into like a socialist conversation or whatever, but the idea that some jobs are worth more than others is one thing, but then the extension that the people who work those jobs were also worth less. Any thoughts on that? I feel like going on strike. From myself. Sorry.
No, it's sad, and that's kind of like what we were talking about on the way here, when I was on my way back home. But like those different roles that are filled, that like when we talk about during the 1700s or slavery time and stuff like that whites weren't going to do. Like, I'm not going to do those tasks. Like, I'm going to leave that up to somebody else, because we just don't do that. I mean, come on, Colonel Sanders with that all white suit on, you thought he was going to get out there and get dirty? Doubt it. So that just wasn't happening. And so, like, even now, even today, we do the same thing. We put people in these subservient roles, and we leave them there, and we don't care about them. We just say, well, this is you, this is what you do. It is what it is, and then we tease them and say, well, maybe if you rise up to this level, you'll get out of that, but always having a thumb on them to keep them down. So it's all jacked up.
Richard, do you want to add to that at all?
Well, I agree with London. It is all jacked up, and it's hard to put into words sometimes when you're reading this book how I feel. and I get super angry, and I can't help but think about things that are happening today, the fight by many white Americans to put Black people back in their place, and it enrages me, and then I find myself getting distracted from the book as I'm reading, and I have to stop for a second and then try to get back to what the message of the book is, and that's why I think that Miss Wilkerson does a great job of humanizing the African American experience, in particular during slavery and then after slavery. And I think a lot of the times, white people will think of slavery and we think, okay, well, after the Civil War, that was done, and sort of brush your hands off, but not realizing that, the South in particular, openly, decided, okay, if we can't have slavery, we're going to make a system and put it to keep African Americans in their place. And then up north, they were just sort of patting themselves on the back and just sort of started ignoring the experience of African Americans and the fact, and just sold it as a bunch of goods that, hey, we did what we're supposed to do, but things weren't better. And I think, yes, sure, it was nice that slavery ended, but things did not get better for Black Americans.
Well, they weren't really considered Americans, were they?
Right. And still the debate, are they people? And that's why I like the book, no matter how painful it may be to read, it really humanizes people that were enslaved. And instead of just thinking of them as slaves, and that's typical of what we do.
Well, I'm glad you used the word humanize, because we're going to shift into the next pillar. So we kind of talked about workforce and the hierarchy of labor in what wasn't even America, the United States yet. But this idea that those things aren't possible unless there is dehumanization and stigma attached to who people are and where we all decide that they are supposed to be. And then what happens when they step outside of that category. And dehumanization has to happen. Now, I think that most of us, even if well, I'm saying this knowing that there are people that don't agree with this, but there might be this idea that slavery is so far removed from us that we can't really relate unless we study it. But then World War II, right, was within a lot of people's lifetime still. So that happened, like the Holocaust happened, Nazi Germany happened, Hitler happened, and they used the same sort of techniques. And we talked about this a few weeks ago. The same ways that they dehumanized a whole group of people. And one of the ways that they did that is quarantining them from other parts of society. So quarantined them from the masses you choose to elevate, program everyone, including the people you're dehumanizing, even some of the targets of dehumanization, to no longer believe what their eyes are seeing and no longer trust their own thoughts. Okay. And some people might say they weren't brainwashed, they knew what they were doing, but it's not about that. Some of it is, like that picture we showed at the very beginning of, I forgot the guy's name, but that photo at one of the first rallies for Hitler, when the guy was sitting back and crossing his arms. He didn't buy in for whatever reason, right? And then the other people, for whatever reason, psychologically, Lennon, you kind of talked, or I don't remember who said it, but psychologically, what is that doing to you when the people around you are saying that they are seeing and feeling something that you're not? And you're the outcast, and you don't want to be outcast like the people you're trying to outcast. Okay, so this happens today, right? This happens today. Kids in cages at the border. Haitian immigrants seeking asylum. This is happening right now. Do you guys have thoughts on this? I know it's hard.
No, it is, but you look at it on like from both lenses. It's like they don't want to. It's like sometimes they don't want to show the ugliness that's behind all of that because they don't want us to know the truth. But you know, then they try to spin it as though, hey, they use the words, these monsters, these rebels, these bandits, these gangsters, evil, whatever you want to call it. They make it, they spin it like that to make us start to think that, oh no, they should be caged up, they should be wrangled up, and sent back because they're bad, they're evil, they're just going to come here and just disrupt stuff and tear stuff up. And then you start getting brainwashed, and you haven't even had a conversation or even seen the inhumane things that have been going on, or spoken to somebody that's been going through it, but you have now started to believe the lies, because you don't want to ask questions about the truth, and so you fall into it, and you start to believe it. The Birth of a Nation, that movie, terrible, right? Making blacks look like pure monsters. It was white folks in blackface, acting like blacks were evil, and how they portrayed it. But then who came to the rescue? The Ku Klux Klan. So now you have all these people fighting for, oh yeah, no, the Klan is good. The Klan is this. Look, they restored America. They did everything. So you have all this brainwashing, but no one wants to ask the questions. Why? Why are we treating people like this? Why are we dehumanizing people, that we don't even know? We're just buying into these lies that people are force feeding us to believe. And it's terrible, and it's still going on. It's
like Fox News could just run Birth of a Nation on a loop and never do anything else, and it would be the same
all day long.
Yeah,
all day long.
Because that's all you're doing is sending out that message that these people don't matter, that whatever you're being told about their state as human beings, and we'll just keep going back to the border because it's happening right now, that it doesn't matter what you're seeing on the news, it doesn't matter what you're hearing, or even if you have any sort of empathy or sympathy, don't trust your thoughts, because like you're saying, they're monsters. You have to believe what we're telling you about how horrible it's going to be if we let them in. And then the idea that they're a mass, right? That it's like this nameless, faceless mass of people. Because I like that. I mean, I think it's something that we talk about a lot. What I know that I always think of this when I think of America, this whole idea of individuality, right? But it's a luxury afforded only to the dominant caste. I think that this conversation comes up, not these exact words, but this conversation comes up a lot when we see prominent news stories about police shootings, especially unarmed people of color, because they're faceless. But then, like, maybe not so much now, but definitely before, the police officers were always sort of at the forefront, and then everything about the person who was killed that was negative was at the forefront instead of the person as a human being. And then it was like, and we talked about this with So You Want to Talk About Race, the thug labels, the N-word labels that are just spread across a whole group of people instead of each individual being allowed or being given the benefit of the doubt. Any thoughts on this?
No, I do agree with you though. Yeah, I mean, George Floyd as an example, and immediately after he was murdered, stories came out about his drug use, and just bad things came out about him, and the police department trying to protect themselves started sending that kind of information out. But I think it was one time where I started to see where they showed him like standing in the store before he was murdered, and he was joking with people, and he was human, and then his girlfriend talked about him, and he was human and the things that he did with his life, and he was struggling with some drug abuse, but he always was trying to do good things. And then it brought it, at least for me, it brought it home. Like I like that this is a good man that was killed. And then that thought process started changing. And I don't know if we're there yet, but I'm just saying in that incident, that's what struck me the most when I think of George Floyd. And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that's sort of like what sparked the movement towards, because even a year ago, I can't imagine myself having these conversations, reading this book and then having a conversation on a live feed, like for myself,
Right.
or even seeing how people came together and protest, like the way that was handled across the U.S. and how it really showed sort of that division and the belief in that mass dehumanization of people. Let me pull this. It's a kind of a longer one again, but okay. So the dehumanized group is merged into a single mass of undifferentiated bodies that are no longer seen as humans deserving of empathy. There's a typo, but as objects over whom they could exert total control and do whatever they wanted. Policing, education, control of not having education, of religion, the kinds of jobs, again, like the workforce, what you could do, where you could be, who you could be with, what you could wear, all of that. You merge all of these people, and then you hear stories, right, of like in Roots. Sometimes I go back to that. Where it comes down to, you see or read these fictionalized stories about the white person who is friends with a Black person, and then when the time comes, they make the decision against that person. They make the decision to see them in the mass of dehumanized people versus the friend or lover or even family member, right? How easy that is, and how people don't talk about, or we don't see it as caste. We see it as racism, but we don't really see it as like ingrained in the foundation of this country. Well, maybe some of us do, but it's hard to kind of get that message across. Go ahead.
It reminds me of when we first started holding college classes out at the prison, and just the thought process of going into the prison. And you always heard the stats. The majority of people in prison are people of color. But you go into the prison, you're terrified because you just know that there's bad people in prison that have committed some horrendous things. But then to get into the prison and start to realize that they're human beings, and they're human beings being caged, and then you start to see their surroundings, and then empathy starts kicking in, and an understanding of that everybody deserves a chance. And no matter how horrendous some of these crimes are, and they probably, there's criminals that belong where they're at, but also at the same time, their life situation, and then to learn, through research that 100% of people in prison are victims of trauma or trauma survivors, and 100%, all of them. And you go back to their childhood and they were beat, and you start to hear these stories, and you're thinking, how unfair was life that they ended up in prison. And so the humanizing part, it is something I can grasp because of these recent experiences of working in the prisons. And it makes you want to change your thought processes for all. And sort of trying to capture, when did you mentally, was it drilled in your head that this group of people were bad and this group of people were good? And how do you break that down? Because just some horrific things have been told to me throughout my life. And I think about it now and I'm like, oh my God, like, and here I believed things that I was being told, and am very blessed to be able to learn through what my biases are and what was created within my own psyche. And I just hope that other white people can start to do the same, in a sense of everybody breaking down, if you're Black and if you're still, stuck in that hold of racism and trying to fight it and fighting your way out. And then as whites believing you're superior to other people just because of the color of your skin, it just blows my mind. And I talk about racism within my own family, and I've told that story before. My mom's mom, Grandma Nelson, who I love very much, but she had racists all over her when I think about some of the things she used to say and the way she used to act around Black people. And it's embarrassing. I still love her, but then at the same time, I'm like, what was she teaching me? I was very blessed to have a mom that used to fight her on it, like, stop it. People are people, and we're that kind of conversation. And she did that in front of her 11 children. And so I guess I'm blessed that at least I was paying attention at the time. Anyways.
Well, you know who wasn't blessed? All of these people that lived during this time when we accepted this culture of cruelty. Okay? They thought they were blessed, right? Because a lot of times this was done in the name of the Lord. The horrors that we have perpetuated on one another, the attempted extermination of the Jewish people, the enslavement of Africans, the destruction of Native American civilizations. So across generations, across centuries, millennia, I guess, it's I don't want to say human nature, but we are human beings committing these cruel acts on other human beings. And we decided, right, as a humanity, that one of the ways that we were going to do that is by skin color. And then we figured out the best ways to dehumanize people so that the other people would buy into what we wanted to do to exterminate, commit genocide across the globe. And we're not, 2 out of 3 of these were based in America. So, it's just not great. Because of all that, and this idea of the culture of cruelty, I like that phrase that she uses. And we talked a little bit about empathy before, but these things build up the immune system against empathy. So you're dehumanizing people. There's a stigma around being who they are. There's a stigma around the kinds of jobs they're allowed to have. You don't see them as people, you see them as objects. And that creates this lack of empathy. Anyone want to take a stab at a comment about empathy when it comes to humanity and the way we treat people? It could be today, could be something you read.
I think it's true. I think we, when we start looking at people as objects and not as human, then it's easy not to have empathy. When we're, like I said, we ascribe all of these different tasks and chores to a set group of people, or even in regards to law enforcement, that we look at a set group of people as bad or as gangsters or as this or as that, or we go by stats. Well, stats say that this group of people commit the most crimes, which is full of crap. But we buy into it. And just like across the board, we buy into it. These people are savages. These people are, are bad. And instead of us standing up and starting to think for ourselves, it's a big clique. We don't want to be kicked out of the clique. We don't want to be told that, oh, well, you're not part of the cool crew because you don't believe what we what we believe. It's the same thing within law enforcement. If you don't jump in with both feet and start believing the same crap that they believe, voting for the same people that they vote for, then they look at you like you're crazy, but that's across the board. That's either, we accept this culture of cruelty in every aspect of humanity, and it's up to us to not deal with it and to say, no, I'm not going to believe this stuff just because you're telling me that, you're force feeding me, telling me that it's true. I'm not going to believe it. I'm gonna get out there and do my own research about people. I remember 9/11 happening, and everybody came out against Muslims, and at that time, and still to this day, one of my family's closest friend is Muslim, and we were over their house, and just everything that he told my wife and I about, this is not Islam, like the stuff that you're seeing and things that you're hearing about us, and like, this is not it. And think about if we didn't have those conversations, if we didn't have those friends that truly showed us what Islam really meant, like, we would be falling in line with every other knucklehead trying to say that everybody from from the Middle East is bad, but it's being curious and being willing to step out of that crap that people are trying to feed us, and understanding, trying to go out and understand people so that we're not judgmental anymore. So yeah, it's nuts.
But it's also that I want to say misunderstanding of the way things are built. Like, we're having this conversation because we're reading this book, and so we're invested in learning about how the caste system works, and maybe having the question before reading the book, like, is this really the way that things are, or is it just about racism? And then realizing that racism wouldn't exist if the caste system wasn't so much ingrained and part of the foundation of our country. And so that it's a difficult topic to grasp. So we wouldn't be having these conversations if the caste system wasn't part of America, right? We wouldn't have the need to have these conversations. Okay, so this next part is a continuation of the conversation about cruelty. And it's awful and horrible. Okay, so pillar 7, terror as enforcement and cruelty as a means of control. And that's exactly what it is. And again, this is one of those things where these things that I'm going to pull out could be happening today anywhere in the United States, based on your activities as a citizen, based on the policing activities in your community. If you're beyond that, based on the justice system or education. Okay. So this is an idea that I want to say it springs up every Martin Luther King Day, I think. The idea that, people who say nothing are, worse than the people who are perpetrating. So evil asks little of the dominant caste other than to sit back and do nothing. Okay. And she uses the word evil. So this could be like a religious thing. It could, do you believe in good versus evil? Is it an abstract thing? Do you know people that come to mind? Are there activities? Are there crimes? Are there historical figures that you would attach this evil word to? Real people. There's plenty of fictional people, but real people or events where people said nothing and allowed it to happen. Anything come to mind? I mean, I know we want to talk about Hitler, but it's not just that.
Well, I think even in the book, and I can't reference names, but even preachers coming by to find a man, that's been lynched and hanging in a tree, still alive, been whipped, and takes him down and gets a doctor, but then just sort of rides away. I mean, it doesn't say that in the book, but that thought process of like but at the same time, I'm wondering, with that culture and that time frame, what was he to do? He got the guy a doctor. That was probably big given the caste system at the time.
So what? Then he goes to heaven.
Yeah, then he went to
doctor.
heaven after that. Right after he got his good deed badge and went to heaven. But I don't know. For me, the hardest in when you talk about fathers and wives and moms being separated, because they were sold off, their children were sold off, and or in the punishment where fathers were forced to hold down children so they could be beaten. And I just there's going to be for people that were around during that time a special place in hell. If you believe in hell and Jesus Christ, then there's a special place in hell for those people, because I mean that's where the cruelty involved is just to keep a whole group of people in line. Is that what the attempt is here?
Mm-hmm.
Using
Yes.
fear and cruelty, and the fact that we as a country, and still don't to this day, I mean, if you read somebody like Wilkerson, in which you truly lays it out there. I mean, probably one of the best history books that I've ever read, but we've never talked about those things in history, and how do you learn a lesson if people don't know about it? And that's the part of, the people I know, even the Trumpers out there, if they read this and believed it, I know that they would be changed in walking away. But there's such a fight to maintain superiority. They don't want to read this. Because to them, they're like, I don't want to know the truth.
There's a lot to lose. There's a lot to lose. So much to gain in ignorance.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Good point.
No, it's so true. I mean, it's that quote, evil asks little of the dominant caste other than to sit back and do nothing. I mean, that, like, the dominant caste have counted the cost of speaking up. They've counted the cost. They lose it all when they speak up. They lose the status, the privilege, the friends, the luxuries that they have. They lose everything. They actually lose their identity. So for them to just to speak up, it goes against everything like that is prompting them to do the right thing because of everything that they would lose. And it's so make believe of what they have and what they've obtained just by from caste, but they just sit back and watch because they don't want to get involved. I deal with people like that on the daily. I don't want to get involved. I would rather stay here and in my comfort and just say, hey, guess what? Everything is okay for you guys now. And instead of actually speaking up or hearing people out for the things that they're actually going through, or the things that they've actually, that they've actually been through in a sense historically. Nobody wants to talk about that, because after that you're giving people the history that they weren't given. Mm-hmm. and they would rather sit back and do nothing than to, like I said, to risk it all.
In this section where I pulled this from, she talks a little bit about, just a couple of sentences about, we're a law and order country. And so this idea that there are laws in place against assault, battery, homicide, murder, there are laws in place. There are also laws in place against like conspiracy. Are you aiding and abetting? All those things are part of our justice system. We have these laws, have had them for hundreds of years. Okay, they came with us to America from England. We're a common law country. So this idea that because things were codified, because there were permissions in place for the dominant caste to do what they wanted, they could just sit back and do nothing, and there would be no repercussions, no accountability, no punishment. And
Yep.
I know I'm not saying anything new. We've allowed most any atrocity to be inflicted on the Black body. You guys don't have to comment on these. And human history is rife with examples of inconceivable violence, and Americans like to think that we are far removed. Some of the examples she gave are, I think Attila the Hun was one of the examples that she gave. So it's like these examples of historical figures, even like ancient figures that we're reading about, and we're like, oh, that's all human sacrifice. Oh my goodness, that's horrible. I can't believe that they did that, and savages in the way that they ran their civilizations. But we want to talk like we're far removed, but these things that we're talking about happened, within the last 100 years. A lot of them are happening right now as we're speaking. I'm gonna let it sit there for a second. Nazi Germany and the American South devised shockingly similar means of punishment to instill terror in the subordinate caste. I think this is another thing that Americans don't want to contend with. This was a hard section for me to read. Any last comments on Pillar 7, this idea of terror as enforcement and cruelty as a means of control? I feel like, for me, because we're seeing these things, I think, on the news still consistently, I wasn't surprised, but it feels pretty awful. Deep breaths, everybody. Okay. Pillar 8. And how do we allow these things to exist? This idea, Pillar 8, that there's an inherent superiority and inherent inferiority. It's like, no question, this is just the way things are now. We created the system, and now everyone has to abide by it. Okay? So it must be understood in every interaction that one group is superior and inherently deserving of the best in a society, and that those who are deemed the lowest were deserving of their plight. This has been said in several different ways over the last few chapters, but she pulls us in as a pillar that is upholding the caste system. And I'm going to pull this out because South Carolina, once again, hitting it out of the park. 1735, specified fabrics allowed to be worn by African Americans. And 200 years later, soldiers being killed for wearing army uniforms, serving their country. These are free men and women serving their country, going to war, surviving. So this is 200 years. So 200 years. This is like what Angel was saying last week about going to your local Hall of Records and seeing, like, doing some research about the kinds of ordinances and laws that are in place in your town. Like, what kinds of things are part of your little community that are still something like this, that are prohibiting people from doing or saying or being human beings in a society. Any thoughts on this? I'm sure you have thoughts. All right, let me bring something up then. Because this code in 1735, and then the idea that 200 years later, if you're breaking you're breaking the brain of the superior caste or the dominant caste, that you can't be wearing certain things or acting a certain way, so that if you happen to be an African-American person in a military uniform, it doesn't matter because you're actually stepping out of place. Because if I'm not in the military, but you are, you're kind of supposed to be more respected than me, and I can't have that, right? So let's talk a little bit about this. In spring of this year, Army Second Lieutenant Karen Nazario pepper sprayed while in uniform. I thought about pulling the video up, but it was so traumatizing I decided not to. You guys remember this?
Yeah.
Yeah, you probably remember. We talked about it. I think we talked about it a lot in the spring. Brought it up during our last session So you want to talk about race. This was in April of this year. And so I wanted to pull this out from 1735 and then talk about how, in 1935 or 1945, right, when Black soldiers were coming back from World War II, after that, Korea, Vietnam, right, like all the wars. It doesn't matter if you're wearing the uniform. If you're a police officer, it doesn't matter if you're wearing the uniform. But specifically this. Do you have thoughts? Feelings? Reactions?
Yes, jacked up. Once again, I mean, but just like even with what we had, what you posted before, it's like it didn't matter that you were serving your country. It did not matter that even the rank on your sleeve was superior than the average white man walking down the street. You were still a Black man in uniform. Mm-hmm. So you were still, you needed to fall in line, move off the sidewalk if I'm walking through. You still need to be subservient in your attitudes towards white people. So it really didn't matter. I mean, you think about it, like a lot of African Americans didn't even get the GI Bill and they served. Like it was still, thanks for your service. We'll take it from here. Like we do whatever we want to do. And it's terrible. And yeah, that incident with the lieutenant, yeah, of course. The second lieutenant, it was terrible too, because they didn't view him as a soldier, a high-ranking soldier. They saw a Black man. Mm-hmm. Straight up, they saw a Black man. And it's terrible because all of that stuff starts to click in. Oh, it's a Black man. They're aggressive. They're kind of violent. Probably has some rap music playing and he's kind of amped up right now. All this stuff is going through their heads. They didn't look at, they looked past the uniform. They looked past the rank, the bars on his collar. And instead of them saying, okay, well, this is a second lieutenant and he's serving, he's serving our country, putting his behind on the line. How do I show this man some respect? How do I show him some respect? They didn't even go there. They didn't go there. And the young officer, he was just following suit of the senior officer. So
yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
Okay. And even jump into go ahead.
I was just gonna move on because it's like I'm just gonna move on. Okay. Years after the Nazis were defeated across the Atlantic, African Americans were still being brutalized for the least appearance of stepping out of place. So when I watched that clip and all the other clips, but when I watched that one, it's sort of like this, he's in his uniform and he's saying like, do you understand what you're doing? Like who I am? And like, he doesn't say these words, but it's like, what are you doing? Like, you're not even asking me any legitimate questions. But then like the other guy, to me, it's like, you're doing something, you're not obeying my orders. You're taller, you're bigger, you're smarter, you're in better shape. It's like, I'm going to take you down. It's like this weird, you're stepping out of, in all of these ways, like you're wearing the uniform, you're driving a nice car, you're talking back. I think you're talking back. You're resisting, like all these different ways, right? All of these different ways that he was not stepping off the sidewalk. All of these different ways that infuriated him, like one after these instances, one after another. What were you going to say, Richard?
No, you're right on track. I was going to say,
because I'm moving on.
to the whole thought process of, because if I recall right, didn't they think, or they mentioned, oh, what are you, a private? Like
Oh yeah.
do as a military officer, and just purposely, and it just, yeah, the whole thing gets me sick to my stomach because it is nothing but an icon of things that have not changed.
Well, that's the kind of the callback to the workforce, right? This idea that if your skin is that color and you're wearing that uniform, you must not be above a certain rank. Like you must be lower than what I'm imagining, right? You're the janitor, not the CEO. Horrible. But this idea of like stepping out of your place, I know we didn't really get to talk about this last week, but this idea of the sanctity of water in the imaginary line, there was an instance in that, and I think it was the last pillar, where there was an imaginary line at the beach, and you can't cross this line. So this is like, this can turn deadly for a lot of people. You are supposed to know where the line is at all times, and you're not supposed to step over it. Don't even get near it, because you're going to upset that white lady over there, and she's going to call the police. That Karen upset somebody, they're going to call the police, and then you're going to be in some major trouble because you didn't know that this, from here this way, the ocean water or the lake water belongs to us, and it can't touch your skin, because then we're going to have to drain the pool, or we're going to have to shut down the whole beach or whatever. So this consistent storyline of there's this line, there's always a line. Someone said that Baldwin talked about the veil. So like there's this veil that you're constantly having to figure, like, I can't feel it, I can't see it. And you're constantly being told that you're stepping over it or through it, and you don't even know where it is half the time, because the rules keep changing. And that's the way the dominant caste wants it to be, right?
That's how that story, we didn't talk about it last time, but the story of the Little Leaguers championships out of
yeah, that was awful.
That was horrible.
And they made the kids sit outside the fence, and then when they did let them in,
don't touch the water.
Don't touch the water.
We're kind of talking about this because we talk about prison, and then like all of these things that are happening. We always talk about these conversations and collective drama and generation drama. It is drama, but it's trauma, generational trauma, and what we do to kids and our expectations as they're growing up. And kind of had so many conversations just today about this book. I'm reading What Happened to You. This is a new Oprah book. And I'm also listening to it, and I will admit that within like the first few minutes of hearing Oprah's voice and her talking about her initial story and opening the book, I was in tears. So it's like everyone has some kind of trauma that they have to overcome. And for a lot of people, though, it's based in these, structured and systemic racist ways built off of caste. And then as you grow up, there's no way to get out of it, because that's the way that the country is built. So that trauma and the way we respond to things and the way we're bonded to people, it exists for everyone. And so you could say the dominant caste also has similar reasons for doing what they're doing. But when you're talking about humanity, you want to pull people back and say, okay, but that's a human being. And the decisions you're making are not humane. So how do you explain, like, don't blame that on the trauma. How are you going to overcome it? That's my TED Talk for today.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, you're right on.
Yeah.
And I wish I was as articulate when it came to explaining things. Yeah,
it's a lot of I want to say shit talking, but it comes from the heart.
It's awesome. But no, you hit it hard. Like, that's what I want to know, because I've heard people give me that excuse too. Well, my family did this. I'm like, my family, your family's white. They
Yeah.
they had everything. Crimea River. They had everything. I was like, at least you know where your family came from. I don't. I said, oh, wait a minute. No, I do. North Carolina, slave block. There you go. But they don't get it. And here's the thing. It's just like you said. What is your trauma? There's nothing. You created the system. It's your system. You created it. There's no trauma. What, you pissed off because there's no slavery anymore? But I mean, other than that, okay, yeah, call it traumatic. And now you got to work just like I got to work. But still.
Yeah.
Oh my God. There's so, I was also reading about I think I sent out that article about white fragility and its place in the world. Oh, so like a good explanation, not that there's like any leeway that needs to happen, just this idea that, you know what, it's taking up some space and that needs to be addressed. Why this is so important for people to hang on to, that is creating a situation where they can't even talk about the traumatic experiences of other people, of people of color, and whether or not they perpetuated it, which I think we have, because we all have some sort of, you know, implicit bias against people. So no one has a clean slate. That's just ridiculous. Okay. Whew. We got through we got through everything. Even though it was hard to kind of deal with some of the topics and the visualizations that have to come with a lot of what is being described in this book. So thank you guys for wading through that muck with me. Okay, so we're past the hour, so we're gonna wrap up. And as always, I want to say thank you to Keith Woolridge. The books that he's donated are going to a couple of students in San Diego. Thank you to Angel for that. Reminder to everyone, this is Hispanic Heritage Month, so September 15th through October 15th. And I've been trying to highlight do I have a book? Yes. I wore my avocado shirt today because avocados are from Mexico. So there you go. And then I don't have any avocados, so just the shirt. I'm also reading Paola Ramos's book, Finding Latinx, this book that I wanted to read and discuss. I think it's a lot easier to read. It's a lot of stories. She traveled around the country. She's Cuban and Mexican and grew up in Miami and Spain. So just within her own family, there's a lot going on. But I loved it because the first chapter, the first stories that she talks about are from the Central Valley, where I'm from. So that just caught my attention right away. And it's a really interesting and easy read. And maybe we'll talk about it on one of our sessions. So go get her book. And then next week, we're moving out of the sections with the pillars, and we're going back to chapters 10 and 11. And these two chapters kind of, I feel like this, do you love this title? It kind of encompasses what these two chapters are going to be talking about. And at least you can't take my white skin, which I feel is a sentiment of a lot of white people. And Keith Woolridge will be on next week to have this conversation with us. London, if you're interested in this topic, you can come back too. Okay, so thank you again for joining us. Thank you, London, for joining me. Richard, everyone who's watching this later, we will see you next week.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.